Hey, welcome back. Very common project idea that we have in our shop happens to be a picture frame. Picture frame people always look at and they dismiss it as, oh, that's such a common thing, that's a really easy thing to do. A picture frame actually has much more thinking involved to it than the cutting and the gluing and the clamping and the finishing than it does for any other project. I always said the thinking's the hard part. Well, on a project like this, you really need to plan ahead and figure out exactly what it is you want and what you want it to look like. If I look at this picture frame here, which is a typical one in our high school, and we frame every single year the students at a pep rally that happens usually around Thanksgiving, this framed picture is the entire high school. And what somebody said to me was, wouldn't it be cool to make a frame, display it in the high school, and make it in our wood shop? So that's exactly what I decided to do. Well, when I was thinking about this years ago, I said, what would look good, classy, and cool? Do I just take a picture frame and put it on the picture itself? I thought that we could do a little bit better than that. I've been framing things for quite a long time. And what I always like is when you take a picture and put a mat around it. The mat board could be any color. Most of the time it's either black or white, but certainly colors you can do it differently. The colors on the mat kind of add a little bit of credence to that picture. That picture kind of stands out. It's a little bit more special than if you just had the frame right up against the picture. The mat, like I said, is about 1/8 of an inch. I don't know if I said it or I didn't. But the mat going in there adds to the thickness of the picture, which definitely adds to whatever you're going to put on the outside of it. If you're going to use a piece of glass or if you're going to use a piece of plastic, all of that you have to keep in mind. Also remember that the mat has to fit over top of the picture. So the picture is bigger than the size of the mat. And it actually goes in back of the mat so it's held in place. We'll go into the shop, we'll take a look at that a little bit better. But this happens to be an oak frame. If you look at it this year, and if I move on to this year, and if we move on to the previous year, these were all oak, which were the original woodworking to Denellen High School. The thing that's cool about this is this frame is exactly the same size as the other years. The frame is mitered, it's been rounded over, and if you look at the board that I use here, I don't have it flat, I actually have it standing up on its edge, so it kind of looks like a shadow box. It's a little bit more proud than a flat frame. It makes it stand out a little bit more. That was the look I was going for. So we're going to try to make one of these, or maybe make two of these. We'll give this a shot. We're going to talk about frames as we go. A frame like this probably would take you, if you're a good worker, maybe about 6 to 7 hours or so if you do it right. Let's take a look at some other frames that we have in the school and in the shop. This was a display case that was made years ago. Yes, we made it in the shop. And if you look at this frame looks a lot different than the picture frame of the classes. The frame that goes over top of this project right here covers the plywood that is making up the side. So we don't see the edge grain of the plywood. What you see is the nice face grain of a piece of oak. If you notice, this frame is not mitered. It doesn't come to a 45-degree angle. Simply because of the fact that if we were to try to make a frame that's this big, that would be really hard to put together. As a result, these two pieces are doweled together. So they're glued together in place with a dowel in between each one of those pieces. This is a simple butt joint. Let's take a look at another frame, a different kind of frame. If we look at this frame over here, and again, another display case, this fit into the wall and the frame was applied directly on top of the cabinet. But this frame is not doweled. If you look over here at the end and the edge, you could actually see that this frame is cut out on its back surface and the front piece is cut out on its outside surface. you literally have two rabbets that fit together, or what's commonly called a half-lap joint. So it's a different way of putting a project together, a frame together. This area over here, I always thought looked a little bit better if it was half-lap. That cabinet looked a little bit better if it was dowel. So again, three different ways that I could put a frame together. I could miter it, I could dowel it, I could half-lap it. We'll take a look at a combination of the frame being on its surface and the frame being on its edge. Let's take a walk. These are the hallowed halls of Dunellen High School. First graduating class, 1937. Oh. Another half-lap frame. And again, another display case with a half-lap frame on it. So there's more frames. 1937 is when this school came to be. 1980, your fearless shop teacher took control. Now, I just want everyone to know that no one's in this school, and it is safe, but I'm going into the ladies' room to show you a frame that I made as a combination of a face frame and an edge frame. You'll probably also get a chance to see the cameraman. If you look at this frame over here, this is a face frame. There's much more surface revealed on here, but I wanted this frame to stand out and again, dignify itself. So what I did was I put an edge frame on top of the face frame, and I also beaded the inside edge, which makes it stand out. We want that a little bit more distinguished than a simple frame. We could have put a flat frame on there, a frame on its edge, but we wanted something that makes it a little special for the girls in the school. So if you look at this frame, again, a combination of an edge frame and a surface frame. Let's take a walk out. Our display case and a similar situation, a face frame on an edge frame. Now this edge frame is on top of a box. So we don't see the edge grain plywood, so you have a nice cleaned edge over here, but you have the face frame that holds the glass in place to a trophy case. We're gonna take a walk into the shop, and we're gonna take a look at a closer look at other frames that we have and some other project ideas. Let's take a walk back in. Probably enjoying the walk, huh? Security. When I mentioned to you about face frames or frames, you have a choice. And the number one choice that you have is, what do I want it to look like? Do I want to see more wood on the outside, or do I want to see less wood on the outside? If I take a board, and everybody knows that all boards are measured by their thickness, their width, and their length. If I take this piece of oak and I face it this way where the surface is facing out, I'm going to get a frame that's very similar to this. But let's say I want my picture to stand out. I don't want the frame to overpower the picture. In that case, I can take this board and just orient it this way. So I have the edge and I have less wood and I'll see more picture. Something similar to this. So if you are starting this project out, the first thing you're going to decide is, what do I want it to look like? Do I want to see more face or do I want to see more edge? Now, again, I'll tell you my preferences. I've worked with many frames this way, and to me, I don't care for that look unless it's a big frame. If I'm making a frame for a mirror like you saw down in the ladies' room in that maple frame that had the surface and the edge, I wanted to see more wood because it was a big area. So as a result, I had the surface facing out. But when I make a small frame, and again, that's your choice, if I look at this, to me, the wood might overpower the picture. Here's a couple of other examples. This person decided they were going to make a frame, but they weren't going to make it very wide. And if you notice, they have a routed edge that looks a lot different than the simple edges that I put on mine. And that, again, is by their choice. Here's another great example of a beautiful walnut frame with Purple Heart splines, and we'll talk about splines in a little bit. But if you look at this walnut frame, again, it's on its face, showing more wood, but also rounding it over on the outside. So you have to make those decisions, and those decisions can't be made for you. Another great project that I think in our shop that should happen is that it should be required that every senior take their senior picture and frame it. Not only frame it, make a frame, but put a mat around it. And I talked about a mat when I was in the hallway. What does a mat do? A mat makes a project stand out. So when I look at this frame over here, and this is a great example, oh, what a family over here. This gentleman, although he's balding, certainly has two adorable children. If you look at this project right here, and this is a frame that I made, I wanted to see just the edge. I wanted to have it out of maple. I wanted to put a spline, as I always do, as my signature to reinforce this miter. And I wanted this to be a little bit more special than just a single mat. So I chose to make a double mat here. So think about this when you're making your project. Do I want it to stand out like this? Can you cut a double mat in here? Absolutely, we can. We have the capability of doing that. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is how deep that rabbet has to be. You're going to cut a rabbet joint on the back side of this wood to allow the picture, the mat, another mat, and a piece of glass. So when you think about that, I said to you before that the glass is 1/8 of an inch thick. The mat is probably 1/8 of an inch thick as well. The picture is really nominal, but if you think of that just being 3/8 of an inch thick for the matting and the glass, you got to keep in mind, do I want the wood on its surface where it's only 13/16 or 3/4 of an inch? Or is it better if I put it on its edge and I can make the rabbet a little bit deeper? We're going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to give you my exact measurements of the two frames that I'm going to make. So I'm going to show you how I figured it out and how the thinking is the hard part. Let's take a walk over to the old chalkboard. I have two, I want to say posters, pictures that I want to frame, and they're going to be a good size. The first thing I looked at was the color of the pictures. What wood would work best if I was going to make the frames? And the two woods that I found out that work best would be poplar, which kind of has a green tint. I know this has changed over time. I had a choice that worked best, poplar or cherry. Because in that picture, there was a little bit of brown or a little bit of rust, and there was a little bit of green. And I wasn't sure which one I wanted to pick up. So what I decided to do was poplar, cherry. I know that cherry's going to darken with age, and cherry just looks richer. So I decided I'm going to go with the cherry. Also, it's for my kids, and I want to make a good choice. And that I know cherry's going to withstand the test of time. So here's what I figured out. My picture, if you look at my picture, it's 17 inches by 22.5 inches. That's the overall size of the picture. So what I wanted to do was I'm going to cut one mat for each one of those pictures. But what size does the mat have to be? If the picture is 17 by 22, what I decided to do was figure out how wide I wanted that mat for each one of the pictures. I didn't want a mat that was really wide where it overpowers the picture. I don't want a huge mat for my picture. I want one that's probably about, let's say maybe 1.25 inches mat on either side. On all these sides, 1.25 inches. So if my picture is 17 by 22.5, I can't make the inside opening of my mat to be 17 by 22.5. I have to make it smaller. if I made it that exact size, the picture would come right on through. So what I decided to do was to allow 1/4 of an inch on each side, making the inside opening of my mat 16.5 by 22 inches. So I have 1/4 of an inch here, 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 that the picture sticks over the inside opening. Then if I add 1.25 inches to that, I'm taking this number and I'm adding 2.5 to it. 1.25 inches here, 1.25 inches here, 1.25 inches here, 1.25 inches here. So when I think about this, what I'm framing, my picture is 17 by 22.5, but think about this because this is a little tricky. I figured out the inside opening, the outside opening of my mat. I am really framing the mat. It has nothing to do with the picture. I'm just using the picture as a measurement. That's all I'm doing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to make a frame that's going to hold a picture that's going to be 19 by 24.5. Quite different than the 17 by 22.5 measurement that I want. The other thing is, and a lot of people ask me this question, what do I do first? Should I mat the picture or make the frame? If you figure this out correctly and you're making a mat is paper. So we can always cut that mat to fit the size of the frame. So if I'm matting a picture, chances are I always want to make sure that I make the frame first before I cut the mat. You can cut the mat, but you have to be perfect. The other thing is if I have a mirror, let's say I'm framing the mirror down in that lady's room. I want to take the actual size of the mirror and I have to make the frame to fit that actual size. So if it's something that's hard where I can't cut very easily, I'm going to have the mirror and then I make the frame. If I'm making a matted picture, what I could do is make the frame first and make sure you're accurate with your measurements. The next thing I'm going to do is I'll make the frame first and then I'll cut the mat board second. So that's the way I'm going to attack this. So let's see if I'm ready to go. I think I am. If I look at my measurements here, this was the outside measurement, 19 by 24. Keeping in mind that whenever you make a frame, you're going to miter it. So I'm actually going to make my measurement larger than 19 by 24.5. How much should I allow? On a board that's on its edge, you probably only have to allow an extra inch or so for the miter. The wider the frame, the more you have to allow for the angle of the miter. So when I do this, I'm thinking that I'm going to make my overall measurement of these pieces. If I needed 24.5 for the length, I'm probably going to make this maybe 26.5 for the length. And for the width, if I make this 19, I'm probably going to make this 21 inches. That is a rough cut measurement, okay? So I'm going to keep this in mind, 21 for the width, 26.5 for the length, and I'm going to start on this project. The first thing I'm going to do when I start is I'm going to choose my material, which I did. I selected from the wood pile a piece of cherry that I'm going to use. And the other thing that I want to keep in mind is how wide do I want it? Or in other words, how deep do I want the frame to go? In my case, I think I'm going to make this maybe about 1.25 inches wide, which will easily fit the rabbit that'll hold a piece of mat, a glass, and the picture itself. So let's take a walk over to the table saw. We'll grab our piece of wood and we'll go over to the miter saw and cut it to a rough cut or workable length. Let's go. Here's my piece of cherry I found off the wood pile. As with anything, you realize that this wood is a renewable resource, but the most important thing with a renewable resource is we don't waste what we have. So if I look at this piece, and so many times I do this in the shop, someone will say to me, I want to make a top that has to be a certain size. Well, I'll look at the material and I'll say, how does this work? Will it work out okay for you? I took a narrow board here and I'm going to take a tape measure and measure how wide this is. My board is about 4 3/8 wide if I look at it. And by the way, folks, the essential part is you can't make a project if you can't read this bad boy. If you cannot read this tape measure, don't even attempt to do this, because everything that I'm doing all has to do with this ruler. So you better know it and understand something. The DeWalt tape measures might have the answers there, but these Stanleys don't. So again, the thinking is the hard part. You have to know this like the back of your hand. When I look at this board, the board I said to you was about 4 1/4 inches wide. If I take that and divide it into 3 sections, 4 1/4 divided by 3, let's see, how wide, you want an easy way to figure out how I can divide 4 1/4 into 3? Check this out. I'm going to show you a little trick. Excuse my back. I have no idea what 4 1/4 divided by 3 is. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tape measure and I'm going to place the tape measure on the end of the edge here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide it over so it hits the number 6. Why the number 6? Because 6 could easily be divided by 2. So if I slide this over, have the tape measure at 6. Come on, baby, stay there. I'm going to put a mark at 2 inches. I'm going to put another mark at 4 inches. And if I take a measurement from this edge to this point, it will tell me that if I take a measurement of about 1 3/8, I can get 3 pieces out of here. But something to think about. Again, the thinking is the hard part. Every time I make a cut on this saw, I'm going to lose 1/8 of an inch, because if I cut it on the table saw, I lose it because of the kerf of the blade. So what I'm probably going to do is make this maybe 1 1/4 inches wide for each piece, maybe a little bit less, So with that, I can get 1, 2, 3 pieces out of here. I need 2 frames, so I really need 8 pieces. So I'm going to try to think, as I'm making my cut, the best way to use this board. Let's go over to the miter saw. We're going to cut this board to a workable length. If I'm working off of this end, keeping in mind, if I look over to the my plans over here, I'm going to go with the longer piece first, the length of the board. I said to you many times in shop experiences before, if you have a choice between making the short cut and a long cut, which one would you make first? And I always try to tell you guys, always cut the longer piece first. And the reason for that is that if I screw it up, I can use it as a short piece. If I cut the short piece and I screw it up, I can't use it for anything. So what I'm going to do is take a look. Oh, I got to put on my super glasses here. But hold on, hold that thought. 26.5 was my long measurement. So I made sure I didn't make a mistake. I'm going to cut 1 piece to 26.5. If I cut 1 piece to 26.5, it will give me 1, 2, 3 pieces. Now I said I'm making 2 frames. I can only get 3 long pieces out of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm then going to take another measurement and I'm going to cut another piece to that 26.5 inches measurement. That's what I'm going to do. So when I do this, I can get 4 pieces out of that, and then out of the 2 pieces that are on the second piece, I can use that for my short piece. Can you figure that out? It'll make more sense when I start to do this. So I said 26.5 inches was my length that I needed to be. That gives me a little bit extra as far as the rough cut goes. I'm going to take my handy dandy tape measure, put a mark right at 26.5. And again, 26.5 is the long measurement. I'm going to take the board, slide it over, remembering that I am going to use this section over here. So when I bring the saw down, let me just clear off the fence here, kids. When I bring this down, I want to leave the line. So the saw blade is actually to the left-hand side of the waist side of my line. So right here is where I want to cut. Now here's another thing. If you look at this, and if I was really pressed for time, what I would probably do is set up a stop on here. To set up a stop on this side of the fence, it would be a little challenging. I mean, I could do it, but to measure another piece 26.5 really won't take me that long. And remember, it's rough cut, it's not the finish cut. So, just like we do with any standard practice when we're using a power tool, make sure you tell your teacher, sleeves get rolled up, safety glasses on. Now, I always like to hold the piece that's in between the blade and the end. So what I'm going to do is, instead of working on the left-hand side of the saw, I'm going to come over to the right-hand side. I mentioned to you guys that if you have a hardwood board, remember these edges are not machined. So there's a big space in between the fence and the edge. That's dangerous if I were to put pressure up against the fence and push it up against there, because I would close the cut when the saw is cutting down. So what I want to do is simply hold this board flat down with my right hand, and I'm going to make a quick cut. Left hand on the handle, right hand on my board, holding it straight down, I'll make a cut. Did you hear that? That's the wood itself kind of squeezing up against the fence as I finish the cut. If I was pushing up against there, it would be worse. But what that has allowed me to do is to cut one piece to 26.5. I'm going to get 3 lengths out of this. I need another 26.5-inch piece. So I'm going to quickly measure from this end another 26.5-inch piece. Take a tape measure, same exact way as I did it before. I put a mark at 26.5, butt up against the fence, slide it over, make sure the saw blade is slightly to the left-hand side of my line. And that looks pretty good. And I'm gonna cut the same exact way as I did it before. When I make this cut, I'm gonna hold it straight down and bring the saw down. If I look at my 2 pieces, I can get 1, 2, 3, 4 long pieces. And remember, I still have 2 more pieces that I can get out of that. So I can get a short piece out of one. I can get 2 short pieces out of one. So I really need to get 2 short pieces to finish up my 8 pieces for my frame. Think about this. Do I really need another piece 26.5 inches? I really don't. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to now cut it to the shorter piece. Again, try to save material. So the length of my shorter piece, rough cut, is I feel like Herman Munster, 21 inches. Notice what I did. I knew it was 21. I had a feeling it was 21. But did I check? No, because I make more mistakes than anybody in here. I double check myself. 21 inches is the rough cut length. So if I take a look at this board, I can get another piece out of here 21 and get my other 2 lengths. And that way I minimize the amount of material that I'm using. Tape measure. Measure from this end, 21 inches. I put a mark, and I'm all set to make my cut. Remember, the saw blade is on that side of my line. I line it up where it has to go. Again, I have a big space on this fence because the board is slightly concave. I'm just gonna hold it down with my right hand, flat down, and not push it up against here. What's the most important thing that I need you guys to understand is that when you look at this cut, nothing is square. This edge is not square to this end, the end isn't square to this edge, because this is a rough cut edge, this is a rough cut edge. All I did was I cut it to a workable length, that's it. I'm gonna take my board, hold it flat down, and I'm gonna finish this cut. Wait until the saw stops. So here should be my piece at 21 inches or thereabouts, again, because it's rough cut. So I'm pretty accurate there. Now I'm gonna begin the squaring up part of all of these and cutting these to actual size. And a lot of people say, well, this is the fun part. What I wanna do is, I'll take these over to the jointer, I'm gonna joint an edge, I'll go to the table saw, I'll rip it to width. Then what I'll do is figure out how I want my rabbet to be cut and the size that I want the rabbet to be cut. After I do that, I'll cut the rabbet, and then I'll come back here, miter the project, miter those pieces, the lengths and that width piece, and then hopefully get a chance to glue it together. I'm gonna leave you guys at this stage. I'm gonna keep you in suspense as I go over there to the jointer and I start the machining process. Now, what's your question? What should be your question on this? I am going to ask you to give me the measurements of a frame that is 8 inches wide, 10 inches long. And I want the mat board on all 4 sides to be 1.5 inches. What size frame are you making to fit that mat board? In other words, the picture's 8 by 10, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. Do I just add 1.5 inches? No. Remember, you want 1/4 inch into the mat board. So if you have an 8 by 10 picture, then what you want it really, the inside opening to be is 7.5 by 9.5. Then add your 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. You give me that measurement of the frame that we're gonna make. At the next video, I'll give you the answer.